rare and balanced view on politics in today's world. Based on facts, born of rationality, common sense, and logic, providing context on today's events. This is American Perspective with Rick Thomas.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to American Perspective with your host, the dashing, the debonair, the not always nice to liberals, Rick. That's right, that's me, folks. That is me. All right, a couple of things to discuss tonight. I mean, obviously, the anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian protests around the United States at our college campuses have stepped up a little bit. One in particular, Columbia University. I want to talk a little bit about that and also give a little historical perspective from a great man who eventually became president of the United States after that. Also, we have a couple of, or I should say, we have one kind of startling revelation, not really startling from the standpoint of anybody who has been paying attention, those of you who have been on this show, but there is a startling revelation. And also, Fannie Willis, she steps in it again. I want to give a shout out. I usually don't, because I usually don't see folks, because I don't really, I mean, I don't mean to be mean to these folks over on X. I do stream to X, and I really don't mean to be, rude to them, but most of the time I'm not looking to see how many people are there. So for those of you who are there over on X, I think I see 3 people who are watching right now. Thank you. Thank you very much. I do appreciate that. Also, we have the usual group of malcontents and miscreants over here on Rumble. I see Buddy Weiser, Pycaric, Amy Jean Viner. I haven't seen a couple other normal groupings, but that's okay. That's okay. I understand not everybody can join. And over on Facebook, I cannot miss Mark and Becky, my 2 typical chatters over there on Facebook. I appreciate all of you, all of my Whiskey Warrior P1s who come here and watch this every day. All right. I did not remove Judge Wild's Pledge of Allegiance, so that is who we are going to listen to now. So if you are of mind, please stand, remove your hats, and join with Judge and the rest of us in saying the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, and thank you, Judge. I do appreciate that for you. Also, if you would like to get your name your voice recording of saying the Pledge of Allegiance in your style, please do so, sending it to me at fans, F-A-N-S, at AmericanPerspective.online. That's fans at AmericanPerspective.online. And now I want to talk about theflagshirt.com. Theflagshirt.com. You can see I'm wearing the American flag one from them, but I also got, and this one actually came just a few minutes before I came on the air. There's one other one. There's another one, and I have, this is a We the People with Lincoln here on it, and it says We the People up in the corner here. You can see the Liberty Bell with We the People right over here on this side. You can see that. And these are some sharp looking shirts. I'm telling you, if you want to show your patriotism for and America's history, I also have One that I haven't shown you, but it also came today, was the Mount Rushmore one as well. So I just got them today. So, hey, head on over to theflagshirt.com. That's theflagshirt.com. And while you are there, think about running off to flagshirt.americanperspective.online and picking up a $5 coupon code that you can put in at checkout to get $5 off your order. Go to theflagshirt.com to pick out what you want, but before you check out, make sure you go to flagshirt.americanperspective.online so that you can get your $5 off coupon for your order. That is flagshirt.americanperspective.online for that $5 coupon that you put in at checkout. It's a promo code that you put in at checkout at theflagshirt.com. Do yourself a favor, go to theflagshirt.com and get yourself patriotized. All right. So I want to give a big shout out because this is a really big day. I don't know if anybody knows this, but today is the anniversary of the inauguration of the very first president of the United States. There we are. Very first president of the United States, George Washington, was inaugurated on this day. And so, in honor of that, because it happens to show up in the book, we're going to do a special edition of On This Day in American History. And, of course, for On This Day in American History, we read from the American Patriots Almanac, written by William J. Bennett and John T.E. Cribb, chock full of all kinds of historical factoids, like this one. On April 30th, President Washington's first official act. On April 30th, 1789, George Washington took office in New York as the first president of the United States. In his inaugural address, he began his duties by giving thanks to the Almighty for the blessings the new country had received during the Revolution and making of the Constitution. It would be peculiarly improper to omit in this first official act my fervent supplications to that almighty being that rules over the universe, who presides in the councils of nations, and whose providential aids can supply every human defect, that his benediction may consecrate to the liberties and happiness of the people of the United States a government instituted by themselves for these essential purposes, and may enable every instrument employed in its administration to execute with success the functions allotted to his charge. In tendering this homage to the great author of every public and private good, I assure myself that it expresses your sentiments not less than my own. No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand with which conducts the affairs of men more than those of the United States. Every step by which they have advanced to the character of an independent nation seems to have been distinguished by some token of providential agency. And in the important revolution just accomplished, in the system of their united government, the tranquil deliberations and voluntary consent of so many distinct communities from which the event has resulted cannot be compared with the means by which most governments have been established without some return of pious gratitude, along with an humble anticipation of the future blessings which the past may seem to presage. Wow. Yeah. It's not quite as bad as Shakespeare. I will have to admit that, but for those who are out there who don't think that the founding fathers meant this to be a godly nation, yeah, you just read that. George Washington, the first one. Anyway, all right. So let me go ahead and let's get moving on to our first thing. So Columbia University, I have to admit, they actually did something I didn't expect. Well, first of all, they put out an order to disband. And then after they put out that order to disband, they actually extended that order, or extended the cutoff date. Well, apparently now they're starting to take a harder line, because the other day, let's see, that would have been yesterday. Yesterday, according to this piece in the Epic Times, so let me go ahead and bring that up. So apparently, as of yesterday, they began suspending students as part, and this is a quote from a Columbia University spokesperson, "We have begun suspending students as part of this next phase of our efforts to ensure safety on our campus." So they started suspending students. And as they were going along and starting to suspend the students, apparently overnight, the students got a little more rambunctious, let's say. So they, Columbia University told the protesting students in a letter that was circulated yesterday morning that the protesters had to leave their encampment by 2 p.m. that day or face suspension. The letter states, "It is important for you to know that the university has already identified many students in the encampment. If you do not leave by 2 p.m., you will be suspended pending further investigation." And the deadline came and went, of course, and the protesters refusing to budge. And there was a meeting held at the encampment shortly before 2 p.m. with the protesters voting unanimously to remain, according to a Columbia University news blog. Sorry, I caught something new. Oh, there we go. Okay, so they essentially, the students that were supportive of the protest encircled the encampment to try and shield it. Okay. Well, overnight, according to this piece in Breitbart, overnight, anti-Israel protesters seized an administrative building at Columbia University. Now, there were reports, by the way, that it's Hamilton Hall is where they picked it up, or where they decided to take over. And according to some reports, there were as many as up to 3 custodial staff that were essentially trapped inside the hall. And one of them reportedly reached out to authorities and told them that, hey, they're not letting us out. They're actually, we are considering ourselves as hostages. Now, the protesters brought in barricades. You can see this in the Breitbart piece on X. And so now that they've taken over the administration building, they started breaking out glass doors. Now, I just have one question. If you're going to go and try to protest something and expect that people are going to be on your side, why would you go and start breaking windows? What would be the point in breaking windows and destroying the property? If you're planning on getting things on your side, why would you do that? What would be the point of that? And I honestly, at this point, I don't know. They started barricading the doors with metal, wait a second, with metal gates. Those are the barricades, blocking entrances with wooden tables and chairs, and zip tying the doors shut. So in order to do this, I mean, okay, straight up, I understand we have a right in the First Amendment to protest peacefully. But the minute this turned into vandalism, the minute this turned into a capture or a hostage situation, the minute that these people started to tear up property rather than peacefully protest, it's no longer a protest. It is now moved into criminal behavior at its minimal and a riot at its worst. Now, the anti-Israel protesters were photographed hanging pro-Palestinian posters from the windows of the building, and, you know, doing all kinds of things. But apparently these people, and I'm using the term people very, very loosely here, the people that are here doing this, they are starting to, they're occupying the hall and everything else. Well, now the university has decided to up the ante, and they're threatening to expel the students that are occupying the building. Now, honestly, I mean, this is nothing unusual for that. This is just an escalation, a warning to these folks to let them know. But here's the thing. Just like with the Chaz Chop, just like with the Chaz Chop area here in Seattle that took place, just like with Berkeley, UC Berkeley back in the 60s and 70s, there comes a point. There comes a point where simple protesting becomes criminal behavior. Now, some of you might be asking, why are you bringing up UC Berkeley? Well, because of the fact in my opinion, one of the greatest presidents in history, possibly the greatest president in modern history, even though modern history isn't finished writing it yet. He started his campaign for governor of California with the idea that the protests that were happening at UC Berkeley were driven by radical left-wing individuals. Now, I'm just going to point this out to you about this. Ronald Reagan, in his 1966 campaign for California governor, he promised to clean up the mess at Berkeley. Now, keep in mind, Berkeley had been used for multiple different reasons for protesting, and some of the protest got violent. In particular, and I was reading a history on this, but in particular, there was a park, and by park, I mean a section of the university, which the university had demolished the buildings and bulldozed the lot, and they ended up leaving the lot alone. Now, the reason why they left the lot alone This probably had something to do with money and resources and, permitting and all of these things when it comes to building buildings again. But the university had every intention of taking back that slot and building more buildings. Well, the students and the surrounding neighborhoods decided that if the university wasn't going to do anything with this empty plot of land, they'd turn it into a park. And they brought trees, they put in gardens, they planted all kinds of stuff until the university decided to come back in and say, hey, now we're ready to start construction on this again. And that got the people who were around Berkeley upset. And so what they did is they staged essentially a protest, and that protest started to turn a little violent. Now, I know I'm probably talking to several people who may or may not remember this. I know I wasn't quite born yet at this point. But I also know that there's young people out there who think that what they're doing today, this is like, oh, this is something new and this is radical. No, it's been going on at our campuses and our universities for generations. For generations. The students and faculty at California, Berkeley, which, by the way, it wasn't just California, Berkeley, but that seemed to be a epicenter for a lot of what was going on in California. I mean, there was San Francisco, universities in San Francisco. There's, as Buddy Weiser on Rumble points out, Ohio State did the same thing. The universities seemed to be a breeding ground for these types of protests that go on. And students and faculty at UC Berkeley were engaged in protests, demonstrations, and strikes related to all kinds of issues during that era, like the draft, civil rights, discriminations, and, of course, women's liberation. But in one of his 1966 campaign speeches, Reagan declared that many leftist campus movements had transcended legitimate protest, which I agree. And then he continued with the actions of, quote, beatniks, radicals, and filthy speech advocates having become more to do with rioting and anarchy than academic freedom. He blamed the university administration and faculty, who pressed their particular value judgments onto students, for a leadership gap and a morality and decency gap on campus, and suggested that a code of conduct be imposed on the faculty to force them to serve as examples of good behavior and decency. Now, back then, there was a very large movement afoot, and it was part of the communist movement. There was a lot of things that were going on. You had, the whole Cuban Missile Crisis. You had Bay of Pigs. You had, the Castro movement. You had a lot of anti-American sentiments, and then, of course, moving into the Vietnam War and Korea before that, and you had all kinds of things that were going on in terms of world events that this strife was coming from. And Reagan ran on the campaign that we need to clean this up. He ran on the campaign that we need to make sure that these universities are not the breeding grounds for these types of functions. And that's exactly what we have here today. It's exactly what we have here going on today. Only instead of things like the Vietnam War, discrimination, civil rights, women's lib, we now have the atrocities that have been executed upon the Israeli people by a group of individuals known as Hamas, a terrorist organization funded by Iran, funded by the Biden administration for sending money over to them, by the Obama administration before him sending money to Iran. And yet Donald Trump had Iran penned in. He pulled away from the nuclear deal that, honestly, that nuclear deal was helping Iran to gain nuclear weapons, which, by the way, they very well could have. In fact, that same organization, in terms of Iran, is potentially likely, because we keep hearing it all the time in the news, is potentially likely going to announce that they have nuclear capability probably right around the time of our elections. That's the rumor. And anyway, Ronald Reagan went and sent a letter in 1967 after he took office, 6 months afterward, by the way. He wrote a letter to Glenn Dunke, the chancellor of San Francisco State College, which may still be, but at the time was one of California's largest public institutions. Dunke served as the public face for the entire state college system, and he was a staunch opponent of radical student and faculty demonstrations. But in his letter to Dunke, Reagan criticized liberal activism on campus. He condemned these people and this trash on campuses, as well as the excuse of academic freedom and freedom of expression in allowing protests and demonstrations to go on. We wouldn't tolerate this kind of language in front of our families, Reagan writes of the campus protesters. He urges Dunke to lay down some rules of conduct, promising that you'll have all the backing I could give you. And here is a transcript of the letter. Dear Glenn, how far do we go in tolerating these people and this trash under the excuse of academic freedom and freedom of expression? Please understand that question isn't made in any tone of accusation. I mean myself too in that use of the term we. We wouldn't let a Leroy Jones in our living room, and we wouldn't tolerate this kind of language in front of our families. Hasn't the time come to take on these neurotics in our faculty group and lay down some rules of conduct for the students comparable to what we'd expect in our own families? If we do, and the we this time means you'd have all the backing I could give you, I believe the people of California would take the state college system to their hearts. And he signed it Ron. Now, keep in mind that children are the ones that need guidance. They need rails. They need structure in order to facilitate learning and understanding of the real world. And as of right now, the safety of Israeli students, Jewish students, not necessarily Israelis, but American Jewish students, is being threatened by these folks. They're being threatened by these folks. We need to start taking a stand. And in fact, Ronald Reagan actually did take a stand. I want to show you a quick clip of a news press conference at University of Berkeley after one of the many riots that had gone on. Go ahead and bring this up. Let's take a listen to Ronald Reagan and that press conference.
Those people told you for days in advance that if the university sought to go ahead with that construction, they were going to physically destroy the university. Now, why did you...
To negotiate many times.
Negotiate? What is to negotiate? What is...
Well, the university is a public institution.
That's
it's an
right.
Important institution
But the university...
for all of its own community and for the community of Berkeley that live around it.
All of it began the first time some of you who know better and are old enough to know better let young people think that they had the right to choose the laws they would obey as long as they were doing it in the name of social protest.
All right, and I want to thank Lone Conservative who posted that on YouTube, and I was able to grab that. But the thing about it is, the best line, I think, at the very end is where we need to take responsibility as adults for these actions that these kids, because that's what they are. They are children just into adulthood. But these children, they need to be taught the truth and the lesson that needs to be told on this. I got a little bit more on this here. But first, there we go. But first, let me tell you about TGRN.net. TGRN, True Grit Roots Network, has TGRN Blues, a 24/7, 365 blues channel. Let me tell you about one of our shows called From the Delta to Beale, and it's hosted by Memphis Mark. From the Delta to Beale showcases the music creators with roots in the Mississippi Delta and their pilgrimage to Memphis, Tennessee, which he claims is the home of the blues and the birthplace of rock and roll. Featuring music from the original craftsmen of this iconic sound, like Son House, Willie Dixon, and the godfather of Delta blues, Charlie Patton, to those that followed in their footsteps like B.B. King, Ike Turner, and the Memphis Juke Band. We explore music from Memphis blues labels such as Sun Studios and Sax Records that spread their influence up the mighty Mississippi to St. Louis and Chicago, and west to Texas. From the Delta to Beale captures the humble beginnings of the blues of the Dirty Delta, its widespread impact across the U.S. and beyond. Join From the Delta to Beale, airing on Friday nights from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Central Time. Also, a replay or an encore presentation occurs Sunday, 9 p.m. Central. Go ahead and listen. You can go to tgrn.net and listen online, or you can find us in the Live 365 catalog of digital radio stations, as well as finding us in the Odyssey, AUDACY, that's AUDACY app. tgrn.net, Austin, Texas. All right. So back to this thing with Reagan. So Reagan, very, very apropos, by the way, toward the end, where he chastised the professors and the adults in the room. The professors and the adults in the room for not teaching these young people that although protest, and again, peaceful protest, is encouraged in this country, it's when you start breaking the law that it becomes not a peaceful protest anymore. And that's the line that needs to be drawn. These young people who are protesting need to be doing it peacefully. They can't block Jewish students from getting to class, which is exactly what one young man had shown on, and I've seen the video on social media. These people need to understand that blocking up a building and breaking the building's glass and barricading themselves into this building is illegal, and therefore should be taken care of with expediency. Now, Ronald Reagan didn't play around. He actually sent in over 2,000 National Guard troops to take control in the UC Berkeley area, not only at the UC campus, but also taking part of the neighborhood that was surrounding it. In fact, they dropped tear gas from aircraft in order to disperse the crowds. Now, the unfortunate thing is during those riots, one person did die. But then again, I'm reminded of going back to the Summer of Love, how multiple people died, including retired police officer David Dorn trying to protect his pawn shop. He was killed during the riots. And how many of us remember seeing those leftist lunatic Antifa BLM protests where they were taking people, hauling people out into the street and curb stomping them, beating them up, stealing their property. People who had absolutely no connection to what the protesters were attempting to do, and they went ahead and beat these people up. In fact, I know several times in the past where protests had started in cities like Seattle and San Francisco, where people have blocked up streets. And blocking up those streets should be an offense punishable by law, because you never know. There could be somebody in an ambulance or somebody trying to get to the hospital, and they could end up dying because they weren't allowed to pass. So I ask again, just like Ronald Reagan asked in 1966 and 67, how far do we go in tolerating these people and the trash that is destroying a beautiful building in Columbia under the excuse of academic freedom and freedom of expression? I say we don't tolerate it. In fact, in my personal opinion, this falls under the same thing that I talk about with the entire situation when you're dealing with any kind of a bully or any kind of a nation state or anything. It's the power of deterrence that is the key. And this type of individual needs to understand that there are consequences for those actions. That there are consequences for the actions that you take. You know, I told my son while he was growing up, I'm like, look, you can make your decisions. And if you happen to be on the wrong side of the law, I'll help you out as best I can. But here's the deal. You go into jail, I'm not picking you up until the next day. I'm not coming to save your butt until the next day. You're going to spend the night in jail, so just expect that to happen. And the reason being is because of the fact that I want him to understand, and I wanted him to understand, that there is consequences for your actions. And this is part of what we are missing in today's society, is that we have allowed these people, and especially when you have rioters getting arrested and have the Vice President of the United States funding a group to get them out immediately, out of jail. That's what you have. And when you do that, you are basically giving the green light and the thumbs up to these people. And like I said, I have no problem with a peaceful protest. You want to hold up a sign, you want to yell a few slogans or whatever, that's great. But you don't need to be interfering in other people's lives as a part of what you are doing. You don't need to be blocking up traffic. You don't need to be taking over a building that does not belong to you and destroying it just for fun. That is not what peaceful protest means. All right. Enough of that rant. Okay, so let's move on to the next subject. Well, you know, the left, actually, these protests are really causing a big problem for the Biden administration. In fact, the more that he sits on his butt and not saying anything, okay, is where things are starting to, you know, essentially, again, as I've said, polls are not necessarily, you can't take the poll itself, but what you can take is the trend line from several of these polls. Well, here in the post-millennial, just really quickly, let me get to that. Okay. Here in the post-millennial, just really quickly, Trump leads Biden in 7 swing states now in an Emerson poll. And this is based off of a poll that put in a head-to-head matchup as well as when third-party candidates are added in. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Some polls are showing that, you know, when you bring in third-party candidates, that Trump and Biden actually get voters taken away. I'm not entirely certain that that's the case, even though I understand that there are some never-Trumpers out there who, if they were offered an option other than Biden, they would probably go with that other option. But the fact of the matter is that regardless of what you think, I don't think it's hurting Trump as much as what people are thinking. I don't think that having leftist and left-wing lunatics, in the case of like RFK and Cornel West and Jill Stein and any of those other third-party candidates that might be lurking in the wings from an independent sources or other political affiliations, I don't think they're going to be hurting Trump much. I think they will be hurting Joe Biden. And of course, we won't know this until November comes up, but I can tell you this much. As long as the protests keep happening, as long as the economy keeps sucking, as long as Joe Biden keeps talking about taxes and adding taxes, this is going to be a bit of a struggle for Biden to actually obtain re-election. Speaking of taxes, the Daily Caller has an article here. I'm showing it on the screen. If you haven't gone over to rumble.com and picked up your free account, you should, so that you can find the American Perspective channel and follow it so you'll know when I go live. But here in the Daily Caller, the Biden admin, apparently, the Treasury Department in particular, has apparently found a way or put in a justification for Biden's decision to do tax hikes based on race. Why does this not surprise me? So the Biden administration did an analysis of its revenue proposals for the fiscal year of 2025, assuming, of course, that he gets elected president again. And in that analysis, they argue that targeted tax hikes that disproportionately affect white people would actually ease racial wealth inequality. So what they claim in this report is that the increasing taxes on capital gains and income-based wealth would reduce racial wealth inequality for Black and Hispanic families, according to the Treasury Department, Janet Yellen, outlined in their analysis that was published last month. The Treasury points out that white families disproportionately hold assets subject to capital gains tax or are in a higher tax bracket, meaning that a hike in those taxes would actually benefit Black and Hispanic families. I don't know how they're justifying that, but okay. The Biden administration argues for taxing capital income for the high earners at what they call ordinary rates, increasing the top rate from 37% to 39.6%. By the way, that 37% came from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. For those who earn more than $1 million a year, taxes on net investment income would also be hiked by 1.2 percentage points to 5% for those who make over $400,000 per year, bringing the total top marginal rate to 44.6%. Now, that's at the federal level. Don't forget, I talked about this before, that the state taxes adding on to that becomes a bit of a problem. And Preston Brashears, a research fellow for tax policy at the Heritage Foundation's Grover H. Herman Center for the Federal Budget, told the Daily Caller News Foundation, taxing capital gains at 44.6% at the federal level, not to mention state taxes, would be economic suicide. Before the tax ever took effect, investors would rush to pull their money out of equities subject to such exorbitant tax rates. U.S. businesses would be starved for capital, and business activity would slow to a crawl. Ultimately, corporate income and capital gains income would fall off a cliff, so the net result would be less revenue, not more. The middle class and the working class would be slammed with mass layoffs and lower real wages. Well, there you go. There's the answer. That is exactly the situation that we're dealing with here. Is that, and this is part of the whole thing, when the left starts talking about things like trickle-down economics, okay, they are referring to the idea, which, by the way, is not an economic, theory in any sense of the word. But what they essentially talk about is that if the wealthy are able to invest money, that money will then drive the economy, and it would eventually get down to where the middle class and the lower class, or the working class, they call it, would eventually get this money. And this isn't, keep in mind, the whole idea of the trickle down effect that the leftists like to talk about. You know, Thomas Sowell debunked that claim a long time ago by putting out a memo saying anybody can tell me who is the source of this idea of trickle down economics. And realistically, it was an attack on Ronald Reagan's idea of removing taxes and regulation in order to loosen up the economy after the heels of the stagflation that the Carter administration put us in. And we're in a very similar situation right now, albeit not as high, because we're not quite yet into double-digit inflation or double-digit interest rates. But the point here is that when you allow the open, free market economy to take over, then everybody benefits. And that's essentially what has happened throughout the entire time. Where do you think the idea of America even comes from without the idea of an open and free market? Opportunities exist for anyone to come here and make something of themselves. The idea that the free market economy, which hardly any other place in this globe actually has, we allow free markets and free enterprise in order to drive our economy. And the only way to free up that engine and get that engine rolling very, very well is to reduce taxes, reduce government regulations, and get government out of big business, which is the exact opposite of what Joe Biden is wanting to do. And any Democrat. I mean, we're not even talking just Joe Biden. We're talking about Elizabeth Warren. We're talking about Bernie Sanders. We're talking about AOC. We're talking about any of these Marxist, socialist, communist, whatever you want to call them, followers. I group them all together as leftists. These leftists are the ones that are looking to destroy our free market capitalist system. And what they don't seem to understand is, and this has been proven multiple times, that when you lower taxes and lower regulation, your actual revenue in the tax market, the IRS, you can look this up, the IRS has shown that when taxes, the percentage of taxes are lowered and the government regulations are rolled back on business, you end up with higher revenues. This idea that taxes, that raising taxes and raising a tax percentage is going to do anything, you have to understand taxes are percentages based off of income. When income starts getting squeezed, you can't bring more money out of it. So in order for revenues, IRS revenues to increase, and for the federal government's revenues to increase, what they have to do, and this is true across the board, what you have to do is you have to increase the amount of money that is being generated that can be taxed. The only way you can do that is, again, by making people want to spend money. It's not printing money, it's spending the money. And another thing that these so-called Econ 101 fail outs want is they want to charge corporations higher taxes. You hear them talk about that all the time on the socials, like especially Elizabeth Warren going after the corporations and making the corporations pay taxes. What they don't understand is Econ 101, corporations don't pay shit. They don't pay the money. Who pays the money? Their consumers do. Because everything that it takes to put out a particular product gets wrapped up into what's called cost. That cost is passed on to the consumer in the form of a price with a markup added on for profit. So as your costs go up in terms of the taxes being charged to that company, that company would have to pay, those taxes go up, the cost goes up, the cost goes up, the price goes up, the price goes up, and who gets hurt? The American people. And that's why they're talking. And by the way, that also would increase inflation too, which would cause your problems with the lower real wages. Now back to this report really quickly. The Treasury estimates that white families are the recipients of 92% of the benefits of preferential rates on capital gains and qualified dividends, compared to 2 to 3% for Hispanic families. Only 0.4% of white families, less than 0.05% of black families, and less than 0.1% of Hispanic families will be affected by the proposed rule change. That's what they claim. Brashears told the Daily Caller News Foundation that if President Biden's goal of redistribution is made the rich poorer, is to make the rich poorer, his proposal would be successful. But if the goal is to lift up the middle class, the plan would fail spectacularly. Note, even in the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center uses estimates that imply that the revenue maximizing long-term capital gains rate is about 28%. So it's clear that Biden's proposal is on the wrong side of what they call the Laffer curve. They are lost. Completely lost. All right. I've got a few minutes left here. Let me just go ahead and round this out. First of all, Fannie Willis. Fannie Willis showed her fanny to people who wanted to actually watch her debate. She blew off her primary debate. and her opponent, Christian Wise Smith. I don't know if it's Christian. Yeah, it's Christian Wise Smith went ahead and like showed up for the debate and debated an empty podium. This was on Sunday after Willis failed to show up for Fulton County's first Democrat Party debate. The moderator noted, quote, Ms. Willis declined to participate in the debate and is represented by an empty podium. Now, unfortunately, because of this, okay, it may affect the polling. I don't know. But as at the time of this occurring, the polls are actually in Fannie Willis's favor. Yeah. Oh, she just didn't show up. She didn't bother. She just said, I'm done, and I'm not going to go there. So Smith, of course, took a couple of pot shots at Fannie or whatever it's pronounced. Smith said that I worked in that office and my salary was significantly less than what that attorney, indicating Wade, was paid. He also explained, and I was responsible for handling a lot more cases than that one, or than just one. Smith also dinged her, saying he heard she might have gone to the White House Correspondents' Dinner and that she was fundraising, but where was she for Fulton County? Yeah, Willis apparently didn't feel, according to this piece, like she had to show up and can just blow it off. Instead, she was hosting what is being dubbed as a self-care fair. So anyway, their guess is that she probably knew that she would have to face questions about her actions and she wouldn't be able to answer them. She's also right now facing multiple probes and investigations. So she likely doesn't want to put out any uncomfortable answers on the record about the multiple subjects. And finally, before I go, this, I'm surprised that this actually took this long. Here in the Daily Mail, and I don't want to spend a whole heck of a lot of time on this, but here in the Daily Mail, AstraZeneca finally admits for the first time its COVID vaccine can cause rare side effects in a tense legal fight with victims of the defective jab. So lawyers representing the claimants believe that some of the cases could be worth up to £20 million, they put in, because this is a English paper. In comparison, the exceedingly rare reaction is at the heart of a multi-million-pound class action lawsuit by dozens of families who allege that they or their loved ones were maimed or killed by the pharmaceutical's Titan defective vaccine. They admitted it in court. Cambridge-based AstraZeneca, which is contesting the claims, acknowledged, though, that in a legal document submitted to the High Court in February, that its vaccine can, in very rare cases, cause TTS, which TTS is short for thrombosis with, thrombocytopenia syndrome, a medical condition where a person suffers blood clots along with a low platelet count. Platelets typically help blood to clot. So AstraZeneca is now coming to light with the truth. I have a feeling this is just the start. This is just the start. It's all it is. Again, keep in mind, folks, that whenever we deal with something like this, what ends up happening is you start with a simple drip. It's like a leaky faucet. You start with a simple drip, and as time goes on and the faucet starts wearing down further and further, that drip becomes a stream, and then that stream becomes a flood. And next thing you know, all of the truth come out. So don't be surprised, especially if this lawsuit actually gains something in the world viewpoint in the public's eye, don't be surprised if we start seeing more and more and more. I told my wife back with this when things were starting to come out about the jab and how it was not, protecting you per se from spreading the virus and all of the other little lies that they put together. But I'm telling you, folks, don't be surprised to see in the next 5 to 10 years one of those commercials on TV. Did you take so-and-so's COVID vaccine? If so, you could be, the recipient of all kinds of money, the old ambulance chaser kind of things. So, yeah. Telling you, trickle, trickle, drip, drip, it's all going to come out. That, my friends, is the end of the show. Thank you very much for joining. Do me a favor, if you haven't done so already and you're over on Rumble, hit that thumbs up button, because that's what Rumble uses, or one of the major key indicators that Rumble uses as to whether or not people like the videos. And if you can't hit that thumbs up button, that means you're not signed in, which means that you don't have an account. So get yourself an account at rumble.com. And once you have that account, search out the American Perspective channel. Be sure to follow it. Make sure, Outlaw Dogs is saying, I like this hat and shirt combo the best. Well, thank you. Thank you. You didn't come in. I didn't show you the other. This is brand new. It just came in today. I didn't show you you didn't get to see the other shirt. You should rewind and go back, and check it all out. So yes, make sure that you do that. And we will see you tomorrow night right here on American Perspective, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern time. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I know I'm going out to dinner with the family as soon as I shut down. So you guys have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you tomorrow with some more wonderful stories right here on American Perspective. Good night, everybody.
The previous broadcast was produced and is owned by Active Eye Media LLC. All rights reserved.